One of the most important skills in communication and, in fact, building rapport is so simple. It's just remembering someone's name. And I am doing today's broadcast because I had a consultation with a physician last week, and she called me ma'am the entire time. And at the end of the session, I said to her, I'd be so grateful if you would just call me Nadia. And she looked up completely bewildered and explained that it took more time and that she was in a rush. And what I want to share with you today is it doesn't take additional time. What it takes is additional intention. So, number one, here are some easy techniques. Number one, repeat the person's name to yourself. So you'll get introduced to John, say to yourself, John, and call the person that name again. Now, it's easy if the person's name is John, Mary, Sue, or Lisa, because those names are easy to remember. But take a moment and focus. Secondly, it helps if you are introduced to a John, a Mary, a Lisa, or Pam to think of another person you might know with that name and do a quick association. So that helps. Now, if you are introduced to somebody whose name is Nadia or Shimini, it may be a little more difficult. So what I've learned to do, and it's really a matter of practice. When people tell me I'm not good at names, really what I want to say is you're not good at focusing and being intentional, because it just, like everything else, requires practice. So Shimoni happens to be somebody that I work out with. How do I remember Shimoni's name? Well, what I do is a quick association. I think of Shimon, as in Shimon Peres, the former Israeli prime minister. And then what I do is I go knee. So I think of Shimon Peres as knee. Now, she doesn't know what I'm thinking about, right? So just start being intentional. And I know it's difficult because, especially when you meet somebody, there's all kinds of information coming at you. But truly the ability to just take a moment and, some people scribble it down somewhere. Well, that's hard to do if you're at a cocktail party and you've got a whole lot of people and you're remembering their names. And I'm not saying you have to be perfect. What I'm saying is get intentional and repeat it to yourself a few times. Do a word association. Remember somebody else who has that name. When I was with the physician last week and she called me ma'am the entire time, it just felt so impersonal. And it reminded me of a South African greeting, which is sawubona. And what does sawubona actually translate to? It translates to I see you. When you don't remember someone's name, it feels like you don't see them. So all I'm asking of all of us, and believe me, I need this as much as you do, is just take a moment. And if you're a physician, glance down at your screen and see the person's name and call them by that name. And you'll be amazed just remembering someone's name, what it does. It's funny because even if someone has a name tag and you look away and then you look up at them and remember their name, there's that look of delight. So just a reminder, the importance of I see you by remembering your name. Now, if you completely forget someone's name, it's also okay to say, I am sorry, just remind me your name again. And then that time, take note, remember it, imprint it in your mind. And like every other muscle, it just takes practice and work to develop. And if you make it a habit and you do it intentionally and you do it over and over again, I assure you, you will get so much better. And again, if it's a foreign language or another person, you might say, could you spell that for me? And, that's such an interesting name. How did you get your name? And by the way, how did you get your name is an icebreaker that I often use. And you'll see it's quite interesting because some people really have a whole story behind their name. So my name's Nadia. My father was born in Belarus, in Russia, actually in a part of Russia in Minsk. And he called all his children Russian names. So my sister's name is Tanya. My brother's name is Anton. And I'm Nadia. And then my younger brother, they were going to call Boris, but they ended up calling him Brian. So that's a story. I can't tell you how many times people tell me they were named after their father's first girlfriend. I've also had people who are ultraviolet Vi and megahertz Meg and combustion Buster. But, it's just one of those things. It's so important to people. And when I'm doing classes or workshops or keynotes, I might say to somebody, won't you share your name? And if it's a very easy name, if it's Kate, it's going to be Kate. But if it's Juan, how do you pronounce it? And am I saying it correctly? And in a nice way, am I saying your name correctly? And then I always, if I'm doing a virtual class and it's a slightly interesting pronoun, I write it down. I actually write it so that I know, because it's so easy. There can be Kara and Kara. So I just go, if it's Kara, I'll put a little car and remember but I always take note of the importance. So wherever you are in the world, this is one universal, My friend Paula Calogeri wrote a wonderful book on cultural agility, and she speaks about the nuances in different cultures. But the one thing that people will always honor and respect is if you call them by their name, if you ask them once or twice and get their name right. I've also noticed, for example, I work with someone called Thomas. He does not like to be called Tom. Take note, he signs his name off as Thomas. So I go, I'm sure if he signs his name as Thomas, he wants to be called Thomas. If he signed his name as Tom, he'd be comfortable with Tom. So it's just taking that moment to honor the person and to say, Sawabona. I see you. I'm Nadia Belchik, and if you haven't joined me before, it's a pleasure to have you here today. I do a lot of programs on presentation impact and maximizing your presence and networking and influencing without authority. And one of the ways we can really be influential is just remember other people's names.